The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
Clifton Taulbert made his literary debut with the highly successful memoir Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored, which told the story of his childhood in Glen Allen, Mississippi. Taulbert has written a number of inspirational books since then, including the popular 8 Habits of the Heart, and as a result has been invited to give community building workshops all over America. His newest book, The Invitation, is the story of one such visit to Allendale, South Carolina. I spoke with Clifton Taulbert at the studios of Alabama Public Television in Montgomery, Alabama. Well, Mr. Taulbert, it is nice to see you again.
Sir, it's always nice to be back in Alabama. You know, I laughingly say that I'm from Mississippi, but you know, that was the Mississippi Territory before there was an Alabama. So I'm coming home.
Well, you've visited Alabama, talked in Alabama, promoted your books here many times. In fact, a number of years ago, you and I sat down for Bookmark in the president's room of the library at Birmingham Southern.
I remember. I remember.
At the time, you were not exactly a fleggling author, but I think you had a piddling 2 books.
And you know, to be quite honest with you, even that second book was a surprise. Because I only thought I'd write 1 book and was not even sure anybody would buy that one, to be honest with you.
Well, the first one, Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored, that book has, not only has it had legs as a book, I mean, people are still reading it now 20 years later, but it's also made its way into some very important places. I mean, that book has been presented to, am I right? That's the book that was presented to Nelson Mandela?
Yeah, and what's so
How did that
amazing
happen?
about it, the story quite quickly, I received a call from the State Department. Would you be willing to sign a book to Nelson Mandela? We are sending a gift out, the government. Most governments around the world were sending him gifts upon his release from prison, and as was ours. I said, by all means. But I messed up 10 books trying to write my own name. I wanted to make sure that he knew it was Clifton L. Taulbert. But we did get it up to Washington, but I didn't know until about 4 years later that it had actually gotten into the hands of Nelson Mandela. One of the members of Parliament from Pretoria stopped by our house, was in Tulsa, not coming to see me, but in Tulsa with the international visitors. And so I was asked to host that. My wife and I had to host a dinner for those lawyers. And when she walked in, she said, "We know of your work in Pretoria. The president keeps the little book on his desk."
Well, that is magnificent. Very few writers can say that.
I know.
I know, that's wonderful. Well, you had a series of, well, we'll just call them memoirs. The first one, and then Last Train North, the Crops
Coming in.
Crops Coming In.
Right.
When we spoke, I think the movie for Once Upon a Time was being planned, and then it
happened.
9 movies out of 10 that are planned
Never happened.
Don't happen.
Trust me, I know that.
But yours did.
Yeah, but it did happen, and Tim Reed did a great job as being the producer. The actors and actresses were just phenomenal, and you know, as in anything, there were some things I would have done different. But one thing I learned on the movie set, that once you sign the paper, you're not the producer.
Oh, yeah, I have spoken over the years many times with writers who have sold their books to the movies, or tried, or wanted to, and a number who have had books made into movies. They're almost always unhappy.
Yeah, because you really, it's almost as if you become a non-entity after you sign the papers, you know, because the creativity of the producers take over, their vision takes over, because it was their vision that bought the book. It was not my vision that they bought. It was their vision that bought the book. So when they're producing from their perspective and not from mine.
Yeah. Well, the wild man Harry Crews and I were having a conversation one time, the Georgia writer, and he never had any luck with the movies. But his opinion was, he said, that's not my book on the screen. My book's in the library. But in your case, no complaints.
No complaints.
And
no.
it did. I mean, all those things. When you have a book made into a movie, it does push the writing career forward, no doubt about it.
You know, and it does something else in a very subtle way. It sort of validates the point that your life matters and that your concepts have value beyond your own family, your own friends, and that you can say something of significance to the world. Because I never, ever would have thought that until after that first book came out.
The lessons, and that's the right word, I guess, the implicit messages of your first 2, 3 books, how people should behave, how they should treat their children, how they should treat their neighbors, how they should build a community, even if the situation is dreadful.
And that's even a better reason to do so.
Yeah.
You know, dreadful situations exist all over the world, but we also have that corresponding opportunity to build community. We have to be intentional about it. It's not always easy, but the return on that investment is phenomenal, and it lives long beyond the day in which it happens.
Well, you put together the implicit lessons in the first 2, 3 books, and you put them together as the 8 habits of the heart.
You're right.
And that makes them explicit. And as I understand the trajectory of your career, that book put you on the road. That made you the traveling workshop speaker for community building, for a certain kind of motivational speaking.
I would love to say that was a plan that I had, strategic plan that worked out perfectly. But the book sort of had a life of its own.
Yeah.
And it brought me along, for which I will be forever grateful. I remember Sandra Day O'Connor read the book and invited me to address members of the United States Supreme Court. There was a guy by the name of Mr. Bailey in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who was the president of a Fortune 500 company. He was sending the book to his peers all around the country, saying this is what we need to bring into corporate America. I didn't even know it. I was working in Europe at the time. I had no idea he was doing it. And all of a sudden, this whole world opens up. We want to know about these 8 habits. We want to know how we can bring them into our lives. And as you say, I found myself being shifted into a world for which I had not strategically planned.
I would love to be able to say this perfectly, and I'm sure I won't, but I'll try, and you'll forgive me. What you said, the 8 habits of the human heart, are in many ways perfectly clear. You should be nice to each other. You should have some optimism. You should treat people with respect. You should have high standards for your children. You should have responsibility. You should have reliability. These are not the invention of plutonium or something. They are things that humans know. And now the good part. But somehow you've phrased them in this book in such a way as that they work. And I'm wondering about the magic of that, so to speak. Magic's maybe too big a word. But you didn't invent optimism or treating one another with respect, but you phrased it in such a way that it seems to catch. You've thought about this a heap. I know you have. Why does it work so well for that?
I think when you look at the circumstances of my life from where I'd come, you look at the segregated world that grew me up and that defined the culture in which I lived, and yet within that environment, I was able to find these habits of the heart being lived out through ordinary people. And I think when people began to realize that ordinary people during a very difficult time was doing these extraordinary things, all of a sudden nurturing attitude takes on an entirely different perspective. You want to take it to the next level. Can I bring this to my office? Can I bring this to the military?
Yes.
Can I bring this to my corporation? If I do, what will be the outcome of it? And so I think that is what happened, is that people began to see the timelessness and the universality of it, and it's being able to be applied to a myriad of circumstances.
And you wrote a special book for educators.
Yes.
For bringing these habits to the classroom, to the student-teacher relationship.
Right. And to me, that is so critical, and especially today, because there are so many things right with our education system, and there are so many things wrong with our education system.
Boy.
But there is one thing that is absolutely essential. If one does not have a good culture to support your efforts, you're not going to get what you want. And building the 8 Habits of the Heart into the school day by the adults and the youth and the parents and the community recognizing that we're all in this together, then we're not going to get what we want. I don't care what we throw at it. We have to build that culture in a sustainable fashion.
Yeah, the fact that Glen Allen was such a poor place, such a remote place, so thoroughly dominated by Jim Crow, and yet they say it takes a village, but the village stepped up and produced.
The village was there.
The village was there.
The village was there.
Although there was no money, no power.
The village was there. And
Right.
that shows you the power of people and the power of unselfishness. Because when we bring unselfishness to the table, it creates avenues and parkways and highways and pathways that we would not find otherwise.
Right. You've gone around the United States and elsewhere saying the very kind of thing that you're saying right this minute. And you were in Philadelphia saying this very kind of thing, and had finished your talk and were walking down the hallway when this woman started shouting after you, "Mr. Taulbert, Mr. Taulbert, wait up, please." And you did. And that was the beginning of the invitation.
Right.
You got an invitation to go down to Greenville?
No, Columbia, South
Columbia,
Carolina.
South Carolina. And bring that workshop there. Now, I mean, you did it, and you tell the story in the invitation of giving the workshop and looking around. I was interested in what struck me as a kind of cultural anxiety that struck you, a kind of cultural PTSD. When you went out to that mansion, you were emotionally affected.
You know,
You looked around you.
you said it better than most, because that's exactly what happened.
Why? Why did that happen?
You know,
You're a sophisticated world traveler
I had on a
person.
suit
Yeah.
and a tie. I had a briefcase.
Right.
I had just returned from Scotland.
Yes.
But yet, when I drove through that tree-lined
Yeah.
dirt road, dressed in Spanish moss, and this low country mansion just appeared, surrounded by thousands of acres of cotton, I felt as if I was a little boy back in Glen Allen. I'd come to the world that I once knew.
Yeah. Little Cliff speaks up.
Yeah.
Now, I love Little Cliff. Little Cliff is fun. And I think we all have, everybody has a little creature who is the fearful child.
Yeah.
Little Cliff says, "Oh, this is not a place for black folks. This is not a good place. Watch out." He's a little paranoid, a little fearful.
It's, I call it the lingering lessons of race and place.
Yeah.
That they don't show up every day, they don't show up every 24 hours. But in my life, from the time in which I grew up, they do show up.
Yeah.
And in that day, it wasn't just like they just had an intermittent showing up and just, it was almost like a torrent of rain. I mean, Little Cliff was remembering everything that I thought I had dressed out of, had graduated out of. It all came to bear that day.
You looked around you on several occasions in South Carolina, several different venues. You looked around you for black people. Where are they?
Right.
Are they in the audience? Are they on the dais with me? Are they in the back of the house doing the dishes, preparing the food? Over time, there were a few black folks who were present, but not too many, in fact.
Not too many.
Not too many. You were basically right that somehow you were
You know,
alone in this.
And that, it's hard to explain. It's almost like when an African American becomes the first to break this barrier. How do you handle that socially? It's not really how you handle it professionally, because you've broken it because you have the profession to handle it.
Right.
But the challenge is in how do you handle it socially? And that was a day that really weighed heavy upon me. And I don't know why. As I said, I just got back from Scotland. I'd eaten in a 13th century castle, and now I'm back in South Carolina, which is just like the Mississippi Delta, the low country is. Hot, mosquitoes, flat, everything I knew, cotton everywhere. You know, I'm asking myself the question, you know, am I the only person here that's had a suit on?
One of the things that interested me was that this particular anxiety attack, we'll call it that just for shorthand, had happened in Natchez.
Yes.
You had been to a similar environment, a mansion, an antebellum mansion in Natchez. And there's something about that Gone with the Wind. Of course, there was a mansion in Glen Allen as well.
Oh, sure, several.
Yeah. That was the trigger, right? The big house.
I think the big house was the trigger, but really in Natchez, I had gone through the Melrose Plantation.
Yeah.
And along with the other guests, had admired everything that I saw. I mean, you could not have asked for more opulent display of wealth. It was there.
Yeah.
And I wasn't thinking too much about the period, you know, maybe mid-1700s. But as I walked out from Melrose, I looked just to my right, and there were 3 or 4 little whitewashed sheds, I thought.
Oh.
And I learned that these were the slave quarters.
Yeah, yeah.
And all of a sudden, you know, I didn't have the same meltdown as I did going to South Carolina. But here, I felt a strange sense of kinship to the people in the quarters, and I understand why. Obviously, they look like me, and they could have very easily have been my kin. And I wanted to go in there because I had admired everything in the mansion.
Yeah.
I mean, everything that Europe had to offer was there. But when I walked inside these slave quarters, there was nothing. I could not even stand up straight.
Yeah.
The place was just that small.
Yeah.
And I'm asking myself, how in the world do you raise a family and dream for the future in a place like this? And then I realized they weren't there to raise families or dream for the future.
They were there to work.
They were there to work.
It was all about cotton.
Yeah.
Whatever else people may say, it was about cotton and the price of cotton, which was too high for human values. Miss Camille, you went down to Columbia. The woman who invited you was a middle-aged woman, but then the woman who takes you over the second time around is her mother.
Is her mother.
Her mother, who is, well, I presume at the time was in her 80s.
Yes, she was in her late 80s.
Right.
Yes.
She is a charming, gracious woman of impeccable manners.
Totally impeccable.
But she had an agenda. There was something she wanted from you. I got this sense in the invitation that there's a reason why you're there. You sense this. This woman has something on her mind. This woman has a need for me. There's something I'm supposed to talk with her about. But it doesn't explicitly get said.
No, it really it
Afterwards,
doesn't.
what do you think about that? I mean, you've thought back on it and talked to people.
No, I've talked to people who've read the book. You know, what was Miss Camille thinking? You know, what were her inner thoughts? And I'll never be able to put words in her mouth. But I recall with great clarity the night that was really interesting. In about the 3rd year was when I was asked to be a guest at the mansion.
Yes.
Which was, again, something I did not want to do, which may not make sense to anybody in the 21st century. Why give up such a place? But I lived through what had happened in Philadelphia through the 3 kids. I lived through a lot of different things that had happened to young black guys in the wrong white environment. And now I'm getting in one, and I don't want to be here. But that night there, when I asked her daughter, I said, you know, why don't you let one of the other guys from Boston stay? I mean, these guys were just totally enthralled.
They wanted to be there.
with the gentry, the genteel life of the South.
Yeah.
I mean, they were trying to ring servant bells and everything. And they said, no, whatever Mama wants is what she gets, and she wants you to stay here. And that's when I realized that I really had no choice. But that night and the subsequent days to follow, I don't know the metamorphosis that took place, but It was as if I had become kin.
She'd adopted you.
Something had happened.
Yeah.
She has her own children, a son and
Yeah,
a daughter that she loves dearly, but there was something about me that really struck a chord in her life,
Yes.
and she gravitated toward me in such a way that everybody else recognized it who were there from Boston University. So it wasn't just me assuming this.
Oh no, you were not delusional.
No, I was
No,
not.
everybody agreed that
Something
there was
was going
something
on.
special
Right.
about your relationship to her. Something that she had in her mind, but she didn't say it exactly.
She didn't say it, but I think, but what was interesting, there were several things that I had faced as a kid that was prohibited because I was black. In the course of the 5 years, nearly every one of those things, she undone them or undid them, whichever the right word is. They just kind of, they came up, and all of a sudden, it was a whole different way of looking at it.
One of them was the physical touching.
Yeah.
One of them was the bathroom.
The bathroom. And here's what get me, which may not make sense to anybody. The night I stayed there, and she said, "Let me show you to your quarters."
Uh-huh.
And as we walked into this room, the door was about 14 feet tall in my mind. It was tall.
Yeah.
Had a cut glass handle. It was a really nice door.
Really, everything.
Everything was nice.
Yeah.
So I walked into this room, beautiful chandelier. Bed was so tall you had to get a stepladder to get in it.
Yeah.
And she walked me into the bathroom, and she said, "Now, I've left a big stack of towels here for you, because if you're anything like my grandson, you're going to mess up every single one of them." Now, that said something to me. The stack of towels,
Yes.
and if you're like my grandson,
Yes.
there was a human connection
That's good.
there. There was humanity being shared.
Uh-huh.
You're going to mess them up. I mean, it wasn't like the white boy messed it up and the black guy does not, or the black guy messes it up and the white guy does not. Now, if you like my grandson, he's a boy, he's a man.
Uh-huh.
You're going to mess up all of these towels, so I'm leaving a plenty of towels here for you. Very, very thoughtful. To me, over thoughtful for just a guest for overnight.
That woman lived in a magnificent home, but she was going to retire to a modest house next door
Right.
that she had built. She was also going to retire in the company of an old friend, an older black woman that you never met.
I never met.
Why did she want to live in the little house, and why was the person she wanted to retire with an older black woman?
You know, you asked me that question today. I'm just as shocked today as I was 7, 8 years ago. Because in all the time that I had known Miss Camille, she would lead up to something, but she never used the word black or white. And she had talked about her old friend that's going to retire with her. She
Right.
said, an old friend.
Right.
And so I am assuming, again, that this is going to be another Caucasian lady that she may have gone to school with, or maybe a distant cousin that she knows. And then she just looks at me, and she said, "And my friend is black," and kept right on walking. That was the end of the conversation.
She knew how to drop the bombshell. She just left you unprepared for it. That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, it was an interesting read through the invitation to see you navigating the antebellum waters of Columbia, South Carolina,
You know,
and the low country plantation that went with it.
I thought of Charles Dickens to a great extent.
Uh-huh.
You know, in a different way, it's like I was ferried back to my past to come back to the future. And because she represented the generation that wrote the rules that I had to live by. I represented the generation of baby boomers, African Americans in particular, that had to live by those rules, those of us who grew up in the South. And so I knew them, and she knew them. I mean, we were both well aware of what those rules were and what they would mean for either of our lives. But yet, in that course of time, it was as if she had cast the rules to the wind.
Well, it would be lovely to have the chat with her because she knew what she was doing. She just wasn't saying. She wasn't ready yet to tell you what exactly she was doing. And she has passed on.
Right, she did. She died in
Yeah.
2006,
Oh, yeah.
during the winter of 2006. And you know, being a writer, I guess I'm filled with metaphors. Some of them are necessary. But I remember the day she had taken me over to the cabin, the cottage that she had built. The trees were beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, the leaves were just really flush, just plush, beautiful. And she said, you know, Clifton, leaves do fall.
Sure enough.
She said, leaves do fall.
Well, that was your 12th or 13th
My 13th book.
And I would bet one of my kidneys that there's a 14th book somewhere. We only have 30 seconds or whatever. What are you working on now? What comes
you
next?
know, entrepreneurship is very important to me.
Right.
And I'm writing a new book called Shift Your Thinking, Win Where You Stand. And again, I go back to the Mississippi Delta. I go back throughout all of my life, literally looking for that moment in which I had a shift in thought that I think was very important in transforming the rest of my life.
Well, you're a hard-working man and a speedy writer. This book took a while.
Yeah, it
but
took
a
7
lot of-
years.
A lot of the others have come right along. But I'll be looking for it. There's always something to learn.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure being
Thank
with you.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.